Were those reindeer on the roof? Had Santa really arrived? No, that was ridiculous. I had stopped believing in Santa at the age of 7. I certainly did not believe in flying reindeer. What then was walking on the roof? Perhaps nothing. Possibly a bit of ice was sliding down the shingles as the temperature fluctuated. It was probably nothing to be worried about. Still, the itch to know, to understand, drove me from my bed at 3 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Eve. The 2 huskies in the room with me stood and shook their fur as I swung my legs over the side of the bed and rubbed my tired eyes. I pulled on a pair of pants and stepped to the window of my second-floor bedroom to survey the snowy, pine-covered wilderness it looked out upon. I checked the sheet of snow lit by my porch light and saw that it was undisturbed all the way up to the road. No one was at the front door knocking. The clip-clopping, which sounded eerily similar to horses' hooves, continued, and as my mind escaped the muddled reality of sleep, I found that it really was coming from the roof. I stepped back from the window and looked up, beginning to realize that I would simply have to go outside and check to make sure my television antenna hadn't fallen over, or that the roof wasn't beginning to cave in. I turned on a light and slipped my boots and coat on. My 2 dogs stood at attention. "Come on then," I told them, and the 3 of us descended the stairs to the first floor, where I turned on the kitchen light and that of the back patio. The sounds from the roof were still echoing through the house as I opened the door. The dogs ran happily out into the snow before I could stop them, and I lamented that they would return indoors soaked to the bone. I shook my head, stepped out into the snow myself, and squinted up at the rooftop. It was an extremely cloudy night, and so the moon was blocked. There were also no city lights within miles, and therefore no light was bounced from the clouds or the snow. Realizing I would never be able to see anything in such darkness, I returned inside to procure a flashlight from the cupboard. It was then that I noticed the sound on the roof had ceased. I stood tall and listened for a moment, before hearing my dogs barking viciously. I sped back out and found both of them staring at the roof and growling. Understandably confused at their strange behavior, I pointed my light up just in time to see the wheelbarrow I usually kept in the garage sliding down the shingles toward me. I jumped out of the way, just narrowly avoiding being hit by the speeding object. I jumped back up after that and shined my flashlight up once more, but saw nothing else out of the ordinary. Somewhat unsettled by the occurrence, I decided to examine the wheelbarrow and roof the next day, although I did walk all the way around the house with my dogs to attempt to ascertain if a trespasser was on the grounds. We found no one and saw no footprints in any direction, so we went back inside, I to bed and the dogs to a pile of towels in the living room. I tried not to think too hard about why exactly my wheelbarrow had been on the roof. I was too tired for a question as perplexing as that. The next morning, the clouds once more hung low over my secluded home. I surveyed the area from my bedroom window, this time lit by the sun behind the clouds. I could see all the way to the road, and beyond that, the great hill over which the sun rose every morning. After breakfast, I immediately fetched a ladder from the garage, set it up on the back patio, and carefully ascended to the roof. I stood on the ladder alone, and did not disturb the sheet of snow covering the house. I looked carefully at the marks made by the sliding wheelbarrow. How had it come to be on the roof at 3 in the morning? Obviously, someone I had failed to catch a few hours previously had put it there, and yet, how and why would anyone do such a thing, and without leaving a single trace of themselves in the snow? I had checked all the way around the house for the second time before grabbing the ladder, and the only disturbance on the solid white sheet were those made by myself and my dogs. It was then that I noticed small indentations further up the roof. I could barely see them from where I stood on the ladder, but curiosity got the better of me. I carefully climbed up onto the roof, attempting not to displace too much snow. When I was closer to them, I saw that the marks really did resemble hoof prints. Unfortunately, curiosity also killed the cat, and a moment later, I and many pounds of snow had hurtled off the roof and landed in that which covered the ground. My dogs checked on me as I dug myself out, and they continued to run around happily as I went back inside to get dried off. I sat down in my living room chair a few moments later, sipping a cup of hot coffee and surveying the snow-covered hills across the road from my first-floor vantage point. I tried to comprehend why there were hoofprints in a wheelbarrow on my roof early Christmas Eve morning. It was ridiculous, but all I could think of were reindeer. But why the wheelbarrow? It made no sense, but I decided to examine the wheelbarrow more carefully. Going back outside, I heard my dogs barking in the distance, probably having cornered a squirrel or something, and I dragged the wheelbarrow into the garage. I brushed the snow off of it and turned it right side up to find that the top lip furthest from the handles had been damaged as if it were being repeatedly rammed into something. Had that been the sound I had heard? The wheelbarrow colliding with the roof over and over again? In that case, there would be damage. But again, I thought, who and why? It hurt my mind. None of it made any sense. But at length, I decided it would probably be a good idea to check the attic. Heading to the back door once more, I found that my dogs were somewhere in front of the house, probably having chased their squirrel. I knocked the snow off my boots at the kitchen door, and then went upstairs to the hallway just outside of my room, where I pulled down the attic ladder. I was shocked as my eyes surveyed the room. There was a large hole in the roof on the front side of the house, which had gone completely unnoticed by me on the back side of the building. My mouth gaped at the damage, but what caught me completely off guard was the large coil of silky, white rope just under the hole. I walked over to it and picked it up. It was almost sticky and rubbery. It seemed to have been cut at one end. Had someone been attempting to get into my house last night? Had there been multiple people? Perhaps one had been on the roof and one in the attic when I had gone outside, and the one on the roof had deserted the other. Perhaps he was still in the house. I suddenly felt very uncomfortable in my own house, and after recalling my dogs, spent the afternoon checking every inch of my property for signs of intruders with them. The dogs seemed to smell nothing, and there was absolutely no evidence anywhere except for what I had seen in the attic. And how could there be? I had seen the snow. It was totally devoid of prints, so unless they had bungee jumped in and out from a helicopter, there could not possibly have been anyone on my property. And yet, there was rope and a hole in the attic. It made no sense, and quite frankly, disturbed me deeply. I ate dinner at the kitchen table, debating whether I should call the police out for a full investigation, or wait for another development. Would they even believe that I hadn't done the damage myself considering the circumstances? There was simply no proof that anyone had either approached or escaped the house. I looked down at my dogs. They looked tired, not as happy as usual. "What's going on, guys?" I asked them. They just cocked their heads, and one of them licked my hand in reply. I scraped the remains of dinner off my plate for them, and placed it in the sink. I then opened the back door to let them out once more for the night. Neither one seemed to want to go out. Annoyed, I began attempting to push them out the door, but they whined. They were acting very strange. "Is someone out there?" I asked them. They continued to whine and ran away from the door, huddling under the kitchen table. The thought of the intruders returning immediately set me on the defensive. Once more, I slipped on my boots and coat, but this time I descended to the basement and took my rifle from its safe. I was taking no chances. I slowly exited the house through the back door. I did not use a flashlight, as I didn't want to alert any potential intruder to my position. Turning off the kitchen and patio lights, and then closing the back door, I intended to make it appear as though I had gone to bed for the night. I did not move for a few minutes, but sat down next to the back door, allowing my eyes to adjust to the dark. I gripped my rifle tightly. I was scared, but I knew it would take the police far too long to reach me on the snow-covered roads. I had to do whatever needed to be done, myself. Finally, I heard movement on the roof. I hadn't heard anything before it. No scuffle of ropes, no thumps on the side of the house, and most apparently, no crunching of snow in the silent night. It was as if whoever or whatever was on the roof had just appeared there. Stepping out into the yard, I pointed my rifle at the roof, but saw nothing on my side of the house at first. Then, I noticed a thin line reaching from my house into the sky, or rather, hanging from the low clouds onto my roof. It almost seemed to glow, barely visible in the dark. I briefly imagined someone climbing it, and remembered the rope in my attic. Sweating profusely despite my coat, I began to circle my house. I could still hear scuffling on the roof, but as I passed the garage, I saw that it had not been disturbed, and realized that if someone was up there, they were already in the attic, and could easily descend into the house. My heart wrenched for my dogs in the living room. Of course, they could handle themselves, being as big as they were, but if the intruder had a weapon, my Christmas Eve night might have a very dark ending. When I entered the front yard, I saw more clearly the silver cord hanging from the low clouds into my attic. I had never seen something so strange or fantastic in my life. It made no logical sense to me, and I could not comprehend what in nature could cause such a thing. No helicopter could fly in this weather, and if the cord wasn't hanging from a helicopter, then what? The words, "nothing human," repeated in my mind. I was ripped from my contemplation when, through the living room window, I saw a shadow move in my dark house. The dogs yelped and cried. I immediately raced to the window, and was just in time to see the back door swinging on its hinges. My dogs were gone. Something had taken my dogs. I heard a strangled bark from the left-hand side of the house, and absolutely distraught, I stumbled as quickly as I could through the deep snow to that side of the house. There was nothing there but more hoof prints leading around to the back. I was about to follow the prints when I once more heard bark, this time from the front of the house. I made it to the front yard in time to see the figure of a tall, humanoid creature bounding through the snow toward the road, a dog under each pair of its 4 arms. I thought about the strangeness of the thing for only a second, before immediately running after it. By the time I made it to the road, it had already ascended the hill on the other side and was looking down at me. I couldn't see its face, but I imagined it was laughing at my pathetic attempt to catch it. When my dog barked and the creature squeezed it until it whined, I fired a shot right at it, hitting it in the shoulder and making it drop one of the dogs. Meanwhile, a silver cord descended on the hill from the clouds. The creature grabbed the cord and was yanked upward, my other dog still in its grasp. I fired another shot at it, causing it to drop the second dog and lose its grip on the cord. It made a hissing sound as it fell 10 feet onto its back. My dogs ran toward me, one limping, and I put a third bullet in the creature's head before it could stand up. I swung my rifle over my back, picking up my limping dog, and commanded the other one to follow me as I ran to my truck. I put the dogs in the passenger seat and started it up. As I pulled out of my driveway, I saw 2 more cords descending from the clouds into my yard, and as I drove down the road toward town, I saw another one of the creatures standing atop the hill next to its fallen comrade, watching me as I and my dogs escaped its grasp. The roads were extremely dangerous, but as the image burned itself into my mind, I knew there was no choice but to keep driving. I never returned to that house, and I never told anyone what had occurred there. They wouldn't believe me if I had. I moved south where there was less cloud cover, but during every storm and every winter from that time forward, I had to try not to imagine a silver cord descending from the low clouds.